Johnny Miller obviously really good player. Johnny was a streaky player, and that once he got his putter rolling, get out of the way.
When Johnny was on, I don't think I've ever played with anybody that played better iron shots one right after another than Johnny Miller.
The Rory McIlroy is one of the biggest stars in golf today, but when the words "he's a cheater" started trending under his name, the sport turned ugly fast. It happened during the Masters, the most watched golf tournament on the entire calendar. Officials tested his driver and said it failed to meet the rules. For a few days, fans turned hard on a champion, and almost nobody asked why his name was the only one in the headlines, even though it was not the only failed test in the field. This story is not really about one driver. It is about how fast golf turns a simple rules question into a public trial, and how one famous broadcaster's name keeps getting dragged into every single trial like this. And while this story starts to heat up, use the hype feature and give this video hype, because golf fans need to see how messy this really got, and how often the loudest accusations turn out to be far more complicated than a single headline ever lets on. There is one name that keeps showing up at the center of these trials. That name is Johnny Miller. The Johnny Miller was a brilliant golfer long before he ever sat behind a microphone. He won 25 times on the PGA Tour. He won 2 majors. He shot a stunning 63 in the final round of the 1973 US Open at Oakmont, the lowest final round score ever recorded to win a major championship. The rest of the field that day averaged nearly 11 shots worse than Miller. That gap was so wide that golf's biggest rule makers later redesigned tournament setups just to stop another round like it from ever happening again. Then Miller traded his clubs for a microphone, and his voice turned into something completely different. He said what other commentators were too scared to say. Fans loved him or hated him, but almost nobody could ignore him. The golf is not like other sports. There are no referees standing over every shot. A player can be alone in the trees with nobody watching, and he is still expected to call a penalty on himself before anyone else even notices a problem. This is called the honor system, and it has been the heart of the game for over 100 years. It sounds simple. It is not. A football player who breaks a rule gets a flag thrown by a referee standing a few feet away. A golfer who breaks a rule has to raise his own hand and admit it, often with nobody else around to confirm what happened. Money is huge now. The careers are built or broken in one weekend, and a single sponsor can walk away over one bad headline. A single bad drop can follow a player for the rest of his life, long after the actual shot is forgotten. That pressure is exactly why golf cheating hits harder than cheating in almost any other sport. When trust breaks in golf, it does not just break a rule. It breaks a reputation, and reputations in this sport are very hard to repair once the cracks start showing. For decades, broadcasters protected that trust by staying quiet. They did not want to call a star a cheater on live TV, even when a moment looked strange on the screen. Johnny Miller refused to play along with that quiet tradition. When he reached the NBC booth in 1990, he brought a cold, clinical honesty that nobody had heard from a golf broadcaster before. He criticized swings. He criticized everyone else was thinking. The others called him cruel and arrogant, someone who seemed to enjoy making players squirm in front of millions of viewers. Either way, he changed how golf was watched forever, and networks after him followed his template of blunt, unfiltered commentary. That bluntness is exactly why his name now lives inside a strange corner of the internet. Search his name today, and you will find videos claiming he named 5 golfers as cheaters. The truth is messier than the title suggests. The Johnny Miller never wrote one official list and never stood in front of a video instant credibility. His voice became the symbol of golf's harshest judgment, even in stories he never actually told from start to finish. This is not even unique to Miller. The similar videos have circulated claiming that Raymond Floyd, well into his 80s, suddenly named 4 golfers as frauds, or that David Faraday and Lee Trevino personally exposed cheaters through old broadcast clips stitched together. It is a whole genre now, built on borrowing the credibility of a famous voice. Not every case below was officially called cheating, but every single one tested golf's honor code in front of the whole world. Let's count them down the way the internet tells this story today, starting at number 5 with the case that started this whole video, and working our way down to the one case at the very end that needs no spin and no debate at all. Number 5 is Rory McIlroy. His story is the newest of the 5, and it shows exactly how selective outrage works in modern golf. During Masters Week, officials quietly tested a batch of drivers behind the scenes, away from any cameras. The Rory's club failed the test. So did 11 other drivers in the field, including the driver belonging to the eventual champion that very week. For one moment, this should have been a quiet equipment story affecting 12 different players equally, with no single name attached to it. Instead, only Rory's name leaked to the public somehow. His team was furious, and fans online jumped straight to accusations, while the other 11 players walked away with no headlines at all and no questions asked. This is the clearest case of media choosing a target. The rule broken was technical and shared by a dozen men. The public shaming landed on just one. It raised eyebrows about how fair the leak really was, and it showed how a small technical footnote can explode into a character attack the moment a famous name gets attached to it. Number 4 is Patrick Reed. If golf had a most suspected list, critics say his name would sit near the top of it. The Reed has built a Hall of Fame resume, including a Masters title and a fierce Ryder Cup record, but every win seems to come with a new rules question trailing behind it like a shadow. At the Hero World Challenge, cameras appeared to catch him improving his lie in a waste bunker before a shot, brushing sand away in a spot where the rules say a player should leave everything untouched. At Torrey Pines, a controversial embedded ball ruling added fresh suspicion, with critics asking why the ball always seemed to end up in his favor at the exact moment it mattered most. None of these moments alone proved deliberate cheating, but together they did something worse for his career. They burned away the benefit of the doubt that most players are quietly given. Once that trust disappears, every future bounce, every future drop gets read in the worst possible light, even when the explanation is completely innocent. The suspicion grew louder when a burner account suspected of being tied to Reed or someone close to him his ball marking online and tried to drag Rory McIlroy into the same accusation by claiming Rory had done the exact same thing without facing any criticism. The Reed eventually left the PGA Tour for LIV Golf and filed multiple defamation lawsuits against commentators who criticized him on air, lawsuits that were ultimately dismissed in federal court. His case shows the harshest truth about reputation in golf. Once it is gone, gray areas stop looking gray. They just look guilty, no matter what the camera actually shows. Number 3 is Tiger Woods. And this is the case that proves nobody is too big to be questioned, at least not by Johnny Miller. In 2013, Woods faced 2 separate controversies. At the Masters, his drop on a hole drew sharp scrutiny from rules officials and fans watching at home. At the BMW Championship, cameras appeared to show his ball moving as he cleared loose debris near it on the green. Most commentators on TV hesitated to challenge the biggest star the sport had ever produced, worried about backlash from his team and his sponsors. Miller did not hesitate. He said Tiger's actions would raise eyebrows in the locker room. A quiet but pointed way of saying something looked wrong without flatly calling it cheating on national TV. Other voices went further. Analyst Brandel Chambly compared the situation to a child cheating on a basic 4th grade math test, a comment that brought threats of legal action from Tiger's camp and weeks of tension between the player's management and the network. None of this an entire reputation on moments like this. At the 2008 US Open, while Rocco Mediate battled Tiger in a playoff, Miller said Mediate looked like the guy who cleans Tiger's swimming pool, a comment so harsh that NBC had to publicly apologize for it afterward. At the 1999 Ryder Cup, he suggested a struggling Justin Leonard should just go home and watch the matches on TV, a line the U.S. team reportedly used as motivation to fight back. He told Tim Clark there was a reason he had finished second 8 times, right as Clark chased his first career win. He said Craig Perry's swing would make Ben Hogan sick. He told Phil Mickelson that if he could not chip, he would be selling cars in San Diego. He called Ian Poulter overly dramatic during a windy tournament, and Poulter fired back at him directly on social media. Every one of these moments on its own looks like for every cheater-themed video that followed. Miller's willingness to keep talking, even about the biggest star alive, is exactly why his voice carries so much weight in these debates today. Number 2 is Arnold Palmer, and his story proves that rules controversies are nothing new in golf, even if cameras make them feel brand new. Back in 1958 at the Masters, Palmer's ball became embedded in mud near the 12th hole at Amen Corner, deep inside the most famous and most dangerous stretch of holes in the sport. He asked for relief, the right to lift his ball and drop it without penalty. A rules official on the scene, a man named Arthur Lacey, said no. So Palmer played his original ball, made a double bogey, then dropped a second ball under protest and made a simple par with it. The officials later reviewed the situation away from the course and ruled that the second ball and the par that came with it should count instead of the double bogey. The Palmer went on to win his first Masters title by a single stroke, a margin so small that the ruling almost certainly decided the entire tournament. Historians still argue about this moment decades later. Some call it a fair correction of a bad ruling made in the heat of the moment. The others call it a superstar, forcing his way into a do-over that a lesser-known player would never have received from the same official. If this exact situation happened today with slow-motion replays and 1,000 camera angles from every direction, It is hard to imagine Palmer escaping without a furious online storm questioning every second of it. The number one is Justin Duden, and his story does not need any spin at all. While most of these cases sit in gray areas filled with arguments and debated camera angles, his case is a clear confession with nothing left to interpret. Playing in the PGA Tour, Canada's Ottawa Open, Duden carded a double bogey 7 on his final hole, a tough but completely normal result. The after, his playing partner, had already signed off on the scorecard, locking the score unofficially. Duden changed that 7 into a par 5. There was no confusing drop to debate, no defense to offer once the numbers were compared. When suspicion grew among other players and officials, Duden did something almost nobody else in this entire story did. He confessed publicly on social media, admitting he had made the biggest mistake of his life by cheating in golf. Professional career inside competitive golf ended almost immediately afterward, with sponsors and tournament organizers cutting ties within days. This is the one case here where the word cheater fits without any argument at all, because there was no version of the story where it was simply an accident. Here's where Johnny Miller's own legacy gets uncomfortable, and it is the kind of 1973, the round that built his entire reputation as a player. For years afterward, some critics dug into how Miller's caddy, Andy Martinez, helped him line up putts by crouching behind him on the green and giving verbal feedback right as Miller took his stroke. At the time, this kind of caddy help was completely allowed under the rules of the era. Nobody broke anything. Nobody was punished. But years later, as the rules around caddy assistance tightened across professional golf, some critics started calling that same help a kind of functional cheating, even though it was perfectly legal when it actually happened. It is a strange and almost poetic twist. The man whose blunt honesty helped turn golf broadcasting into a courtroom had his own crowning achievement quietly placed under the same kind of lens decades later by fans applying today's standards to yesterday's rules. Rules change, standards shift, and reputations, even legendary ones built on a record-breaking final round, get measured again and again as the game evolves around them. This points to the real force driving most of this drama, and it is not any single golfer standing on the 18th green. It is the modern media machine itself. The rules debates in golf used to stay inside locker rooms, and quiet rules committee meetings settled far away from any camera. Now they get chopped into dramatic countdown videos online, the exact kind of video you might be watching right now. The complicated stories about drops, embedded balls, and equipment testing get flattened into one simple word: cheater. Because that single word gets far more clicks than a careful explanation ever could. Johnny Miller's name became the perfect anchor for these videos because everybody already believed he would say the ugly thing out loud the moment he saw it happen. The problem is that belief does the work, even when Miller himself never made the specific claim being attached to his name in a video title. So where does that leave the sport? Very more honest than it had ever been before. He sat down at that NBC desk. He forced players, fans, and even the tour itself to stop hiding behind polite silence whenever something looked wrong on the course in front of millions of viewers. That honesty mattered, and golf is more transparent today because one man was willing to say the uncomfortable thing first. But honesty can also cut too deep when every small mistake gets dragged into a moral trial built for clicks rather than for truth, and when a broadcaster's reputation gets borrowed for arguments he never actually made. The real lesson sitting underneath all 5 of these stories is not that golf is secretly full of cheaters hiding behind every tree. It is that golf still has rules worth arguing about, and fans who still care enough to argue about them late into the night. As long as people keep watching closely enough to ask hard questions, the game stays honest, and that is something worth being proud of, even when the questions get loud. Even when the loudest voice belongs to a man who is no longer standing behind the microphone to answer them himself.
You know what you guys do when he gets in here? Pat him on the back, say congratulations, enjoy it, and tell him not to serve fried chicken next year. Got it. All right.
It's been Arnold. Arnold's probably the toughest to play with of the 3.
Why?
I think it's the people who follow Arnold Palmer. Now, Jack is very easy to play with. He does talk. I mean, even though the people on TV don't see him doing that.
He cheated. That is the exact word Fuzzy Zoeller used, not in a rulebook sense, not in the way any referee would call it. But Fuzzy Zoeller looked at 6 of the greatest golfers who ever lived and decided in his own mind that every single one of them had cheated the soul of the game. 6 golfers, 1 loud judge. Punchline that ultimately destroyed him. Fuzzy Zoeller was once one of the most beloved figures in golf. He whistled down fairways. He smiled at the galleries. He laughed louder than anyone else on the tour. People adored him for it. But behind all that sunshine, something darker was always running. And by the time the world finally saw it clearly, it was already too late for Fuzzy to take it back. Before we get into all of it, if this story's already pulling you in, go ahead and give this video some hype right now. Just tap the hype button and keep watching. Helps more than you know. Now, here's the line that started the era of his downfall, delivered with a smile and a finger snap after the most dominant Masters performance anyone had ever witnessed. Tell him not to serve fried chicken next year, or collard greens, or whatever the hell they serve. That was Fuzzy Zoeller, speaking directly about Tiger Woods in 1997 on camera to the entire world. But to understand why he said it and why it was not some random slip, you have to go back and look at the full picture, because Fuzzy had been building toward that moment for nearly 2 decades. One golfer at a time. Number 6, Tiger Woods. The 1997 Masters was not just a golf tournament, it was a shift. Tiger Woods was 21 years old. He had already won 3 straight U.S. amateur titles before turning professional. And at Augusta National, he did not just win. He dismantled the entire field by 12 strokes, 18 under par, record that rewrote the history books on the spot. Augusta National was not just any golf club. It was built on the grounds of a former indigo plantation. A black player did not compete there until 1975. Club did not admit its first black member until 1990. And now, a 21-year-old of African and Asian descent had walked in and made everyone else look completely outmatched. Tiger did not just win the golf tournament, he made the entire old establishment look powerless. Fuzzy Zoeller finished that tournament tied for 34th place. His final round score was 78. He was irrelevant, and he could not handle it. When reporters stopped him for his thoughts on Tiger's historic win, Zoeller smiled his famous smile. He called Tiger that little boy. He referenced the champion's dinner tradition, where the defending champion chooses the menu for the following year. And then he delivered the line about fried chicken and collard greens, turned around, snapped his fingers, and walked away. He tried to defend it afterward by saying he had joked about haggis for Nick Faldo and fish and chips for Nick Price, but that comparison does not hold up. Joking about a Scottish dish with a Scottish golfer carries no historical weight of pain. Using fried chicken against a black champion at a club that had spent decades excluding black people is something else entirely. It is not a joke. It is a weapon. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Kmart terminated their endorsement deal with Zoeller on the spot. Dunlop cut him off entirely. He was forced to withdraw from the Greater Greensboro Classic as the media firestorm consumed everything around him. His public apology leaned hard on the jokester defense. He said he had been on tour for 23 years, and anyone who knew him knew he was a jokester. He said it was said in jest, and he was sorry if he offended anyone. Tiger Woods accepted the apology. He said he believed no personal animosity was intended. That response, calm and gracious and mature, made Zoeller look even smaller in comparison. The man who had spent 2 decades trying to police everyone else's dignity had none left of his own. Number 5, Curtis Strange. In the late 1980s, American golf was struggling. The Europeans were dominating. The Ryder Cup was slipping away. Fans and media were desperate for a domestic hero to step forward and stop the tide. Curtis Strange gave them exactly that. Back-to-back U.S. Open victories in 1988 and 1989. 2 straight years at the top, he was praised as intense, sharp, and built for the big moment. Zoeller was not impressed. Where everyone else saw a champion, Zoeller saw a player riding a hot streak with his putter. He believed Strange's confidence was built on media hype more than genuine superiority. Instead of keeping that opinion to himself, Zoeller sought Strange out after a round for a direct face-to-face confrontation. He did not pull Strange aside quietly. He talked down to him. Transcripts describing this encounter are clear. Zoeller implied that Strange was fake, that the Joker, meaning himself, had seen right through the whole performance. A 2-time defending U.S. Open champion, and Zoeller was standing in front of him telling him he was not real. The truth underneath that confrontation is not hard to find. Zoeller was also a 2-time major champion, but Strange was getting the sustained spotlight that Zoeller could no longer reach on his own. The press was building Strange into a generational American hero. Magazine covers, television segments, the kind of national adoration Zoeller had once enjoyed, but could no longer command. If Strange's success was legitimate, then Zoeller's own legacy sat a tier lower in the history books. So instead of accepting that reality, Zoeller labeled him a fraud and walked away satisfied that he had restored the natural order. It was not mentorship, it was not honesty, it was ego protection, dressed up as straight talk, and it revealed more about Zoeller's insecurities than it ever said about Strange. Number 4, Craig Stadler. Craig Stadler won the 1982 Masters tournament. He was a U.S. amateur champion. He was a fan favorite on the PGA Tour for years. He was also burly, emotional, and immediately recognizable, and that made him Zoeller's favorite target for public mockery. Zoeller heckled Stadler constantly. His weight, his appearance, his equipment. The most well-known instance came when Zoeller spotted Stadler walking on tour and loudly announced to everyone within earshot, "Nice claws, Stadler. Did you get those at a Buster Brown fire sale?" The gallery laughed. The tour laughed. Nobody pushed back. And that was the problem. The PGA Tour and the USGA were hungry for colorful personalities after the Palmer and Nicklaus era. Zoeller gave them entertainment, and in exchange, they let him operate without limits. In 1985, the USGA gave him the Bob Jones Award, the highest honor they can give for sportsmanship, handed golf's top ethical award to a man who was routinely humiliating his peers in public. The award sent Zoeller a message he was never meant to receive. It told him he was untouchable. It confirmed his belief that the Clown Prince title gave him the right to say anything to anyone. Because Stadler never fought back and the crowds kept laughing, Zoeller kept going further. Heckles got louder. The targets got more personal. The line between banter and genuine cruelty became impossible to locate. He had no filter left, and no one around him put one in place. Not the tour, not the sponsors, not the award committees. Nobody. Stadler was the testing ground. The boundary kept moving, and every time it moved, Zoeller followed it further into territory that had nothing to do with humor and everything to do with making another person feel smaller than him. And because nobody in a position of authority ever said stop, because the galleries kept laughing and the tour kept looking the other way, Zoeller carried that permission forward. He took it with him everywhere he went. He applied it to every situation he encountered. The Clown Prince had learned the most dangerous lesson possible, that for him, there were no rules. Number 3, Nick Faldo. If Tom Watson was the beginning of the robotic era in Zoeller's mind, Nick Faldo was its terrifying final form. Faldo looked at his own swing in the middle of his career and decided it was not good enough for major championships. So he walked away from the spotlight and rebuilt it from scratch under instructor David Leadbetter. The goal was to remove every physical variable, every tendency that might fail under pressure. He wanted a swing built entirely on biomechanics rather than instinct or feel. It worked. Faldo won 6 major championships, 3 Masters titles, 3 Open championships. Analysts called it boring, perfect golf. Steady, relentless, emotionless. Zoeller was disgusted by every part of it. To Zoeller, playing golf without joy was a sin against the sport. Faldo did not perform for the galleries. He ignored his playing partners on the course. He kept an insular, cold, and clinical aura around him at all times. He was not there to entertain. He was there to win. And to Zoeller, that made Faldo a criminal against the game's spirit. He summarized his contempt plainly. Faldo represented the death of the game, robotic 67. Clinical, cold, emotionless. There is also a deeper layer here. Zoeller could not rebuild his swing. He did not have the psychological discipline to isolate himself from the adulation of the crowd and grind through the unglamorous process that Faldo went through. So rather than admitting that Faldo had simply outworked him and outdedicated him, Zoeller reframed it. Faldo had not achieved greatness. He had cheated the soul of the game to get there. That was easier to live with than the truth. Faldo was also part of the European wave that was taking over the Ryder Cup during this era, which Zoeller viewed as an additional threat to the American tradition he stood for. Zoeller had proudly competed on the U.S. Ryder Cup team and watched the Europeans steadily take control. Every Faldo victory felt like a double indictment, both of Zoeller's personal philosophy and of his country's once unquestioned dominance in the sport. Number 2, Greg Norman. Greg Norman built one of the most recognizable brands in the history of professional golf, Great White Shark, an aggressive playing style, striking presence, weeks and weeks ranked as the world number 1, 88 professional victories around the globe, and a business empire that stretched into wine, real estate, and apparel far beyond the golf course. Zoeller hated all of it. Zoeller Norman was a paper shark. Big brand, big swagger, but a history of falling apart when the pressure in major championships reached its peak. 8 runner-up finishes in the majors. To Zoeller, building that massive identity on the back of a record that kept crumbling at the most critical moments was a betrayal of competitive honesty. The moment that defined their rivalry came at the 1984 U.S. Open at Winged Foot. On the final hole of regulation, Norman's approach shot flew into the grandstand. He took a free drop into deep rough, shanked his chip across the green onto the fringe, and was left with a 40-foot putt just to save par and stay in contention. It looked finished. Then Norman made the putt. Massive 40-footer under enormous pressure to force a tie for the lead at 4 under par. It was a remarkable moment. It deserved respect. Zoeller, watching from the fairway, pulled a white towel from his bag and waved it in the direction of the green. The media called it playful, a lighthearted surrender. Zoeller being Zoeller. But what it actually did was strip Norman of his heroic moment. Turned a clutch putt under pressure into a punchline before the gallery had even finished cheering. The following day, in the 18-hole playoff, Zoeller took Norman apart completely. He shot 67. Norman shot 75. Zoeller won by 8 strokes. And his private assessment of what that playoff meant was blunt. Norman shot 75. 8 strokes in a playoff, he acted like it was nothing. That line says everything. The performance was not enough for Zoeller. He needed Norman to feel humiliated. He needed the great white shark to be publicly exposed as hollow, because as long as Norman's brand kept growing, as long as the corporate deals kept multiplying and the magazine profiles kept coming, it represented a version of golf success that Zoeller believed should not exist. A golfer should earn his standing on Sunday afternoons under pressure, not in boardrooms, not through apparel lines. And Norman, in Zoeller's mind, had skipped the part that actually mattered. Number 1, Tom Watson. Tom Watson was the first player Zoeller truly fixated on. During the late 1970s and into the 80s, Watson was the dominant force in global golf. He was defined by intensity, by grinding, by an uncompromising mental approach that left almost nothing to chance. He was not there to charm anyone. He was there to win. Zoeller believed golf was meant to be played by instinct and joy. Watson was the direct opposite of everything Zoeller stood for. He mocked Watson's deliberate, calculated approach, joking that his peer had a million thoughts going through his brain over every single shot. That was not a light observation. It was a direct attack on the way Watson approached the game. The rivalry came to a defining moment at the 1979 Masters, the very first sudden death playoff in the tournament's history. It was a 3-way playoff between Zoeller, Watson, and Ed Snead. Zoeller was playing Augusta for the very first time. He won. In doing so, he became only the 3rd golfer in history to win the Masters on his debut appearance, the first since Gene Sarazen back in 1935. For Zoeller, that victory was not just a green jacket. It was proof. It was the universe confirming that his philosophy was right. He had beaten the robot on golf's grandest stage. He carried that win as an ideological weapon for the rest of his career. The Clown Prince beat the robot. Watson turned himself into a robot, and that disgusted me. But the truth that Zoeller refused to face was that Watson kept winning. His approach, the one Zoeller called robotic and joyless, produced major championships at a rate that Zoeller could never match. The grinding methodology that Zoeller mocked was becoming the mandatory standard for sustained greatness. Watson did not just keep winning at Augusta, he kept winning everywhere. The Open Championship, the US Open. He accumulated 8 major titles in total while Zoeller remained stuck at 2. And deep down, that terrified him. Every Watson victory was a reminder that the whistling and the smiling, as much as the galleries loved it, was not enough to stay at the top of the sport. So Zoeller attacked. He used the 1979 Masters win as a permanent ideological shield, waving it every time Watson's approach validated itself on a leaderboard. If he could keep redefining Watson as a joyless robot, he could keep avoiding the uncomfortable reality that the game had passed him by. What made it even harder was that the galleries actually agreed with Zoeller's entertainment philosophy. They loved watching him whistle and smile. But loving a personality is not the same as building a career. Watson built a career. And for Zoeller, who had the crowd's love but not Watson's trophy cabinet, that gap was impossible to ignore and impossible to close. That is the full picture. 6 men, 6 different threats to fuzzy Zoeller's sense of where he stood in the world. Watson threatened his philosophy. Norman threatened his definition of earned success. Faldo threatened his legacy. Stadler was the target that trained him to believe there were no consequences. Strange threatened his place in the historical rankings. And Tiger Woods threatened everything at once: the hierarchy, the culture, and the old order of a sport that Zoeller believed he had the right to define and control. Each one of those 6 men represented something Zoeller could not beat on his own merits, so he went after them in the only arena where he felt powerful. He used his words like weapons and called it character. Zoeller told himself he was guarding something sacred and worth protecting. But what the full record actually shows is a deeply insecure man who could not keep up with a changing world and decided to punish everyone around him for his own inability to adapt. The sport did not stop evolving because Fuzzy Zoeller disapproved. Golf kept growing. It became more global, more diverse, more powerful than it had ever been before. The players Zoeller targeted went on to define eras. Watson became a legend. Faldo became a 6-time major champion. Norman built an empire. Tiger Woods became the most recognizable athlete on the planet. And the audiences watching in 1997 and in every year after showed clearly that they wanted a bigger, more open, more welcoming version of the game than the one Zoeller was trying to protect. The game moved forward. The gatekeepers did not move with it. And the golf world today, with its truly global reach and its diverse fan base and its next generation of champions coming from every corner of the world and every background imaginable, is proof that the sport never needed Fuzzy Zoeller's permission to be great. If this story hit differently than you expected, drop a comment below and tell us which of these 6 moments shocked you the most. Like the video, subscribe if you have not already joined us here, and we will see you in the very next one.
I can't take it. I don't mind anyone leaving. And I kind of the last radio show, I tried to, make it sound like I'm not mad at Phil Mickelson. I just made a comment that I've known the guy since he was 20 years old. He's been a winner every year, and he looks kind of foolish at the press conferences. And I said that, and I said, but it really doesn't matter because, I'll probably never see Phil again.
He's a cheater. That is the line that made people stop scrolling and click. It showed up next to a photo of Fred Couples, the smooth swinging legend known as Boom Boom, and it promised something huge. It promised that this calm, easygoing golf icon had finally named names. 5 golfers branded as cheaters by a man who almost never raises his voice in public. Fans expected a shocking list. They expected drama. They expected scandal, with real names attached to real crimes against the rules of golf. But the true story turns out to be stranger than the headline, and in some ways, it is even better. Here's the twist. Fred Couples never released an official list of 5 golfers he calls cheaters. That exact moment never happened. No press conference, no statement. No 5 names read out loud as a formal accusation. But that does not mean nothing happened. Fred Couples really did unload some sharp words at several big names in golf, and the internet took those real words and mixed them with totally unrelated stuff until it built a headline that sounds true even though it never happened exactly that way. And if this story already feels bigger than one quote, give this video some hype, because the more hype it gets, the more golf fans get to see just how wild and twisted this whole story really became. So how did a calm Hall of Fame golfer end up tangled in a fake cheating scandal? Fred Couples has spent decades being one of the most respected and easygoing figures in golf. He is not the type of player who screams at cameras or chases controversy. That makes the fake headline even stranger, because it does not match the man at all. The answer to how this happened starts with the internet itself, and how search engines try to guess what people want to watch. Think about it like 4 separate rivers that got poured into the same cup. The first river came from an old video game. Back in 1994, a golf video game came out for a console called the Sega 32X. It was named after Fred Couples, and it had cheat codes, the kind that let players bend the rules of the game just for fun. Gaming websites kept pages online for years listing these old cheat codes. Because those pages used the words Fred Couples and cheats over and over, search engines quietly linked his name to the word cheater, even though nobody was talking about real golf at all. The second river came from something totally different. Golf forums and online relationship stories sometimes use golf as a backdrop for talking about cheating partners. The people would post stories about a cheating spouse, then mention picking up golf afterward as a way to cope. The search engine saw the words golf and cheater sitting close together again and again, and they quietly built another connection that had nothing to do with sports rules at all. The third river came from YouTube itself. The sports channels love big, punchy titles. One popular video claimed that golf commentator David Feherty named 5 golfers as cheaters. Another video claimed that golf legend Lee Trevino named 6. These videos performed well, so the title formula stuck. Around the same time, other videos used Fred Couples' name for completely different lists, like the golfers he admired most in his life. Somewhere in the mixing of all these similar-sounding titles, a new and false title was born, one that swapped in Fred Couples as the man naming the cheaters. The fourth river is the only one that is actually true, and it is the one that matters most. Fred Couples really did criticize real golfers, using blunt and pointed language, but his target was never cheating on the course. His target was loyalty, to understand why his words carried weight. Picture his career. Fred Couples was born in Seattle back in 1959. He turned pro in 1980, and golf fans quickly nicknamed him Boom Boom because of his long, smooth, powerful swing. Over the decades, he won 15 events on the regular PGA Tour. He added 14 more wins once he moved to the Over 50 Champions Tour. He even picked up 3 international titles on what is now called the DP World Tour. Biggest moment came in 1992 when he slipped on the green jacket as champion of the Masters. He also won the Players' Championship twice, once in 1984 and again in 1996. And writers voted him Player of the Year for 2 years in a row in both 1991 and 1992. He represented his country on 5 different Ryder Cup teams and later became a trusted leader, serving as President's Cup captain 3 separate times. In 2013, golf made it official and inducted him into the World Golf Hall of Fame. Even later in life, he kept winning, capturing the Senior Players Championship in 2011 and the Senior Open Championship at Turnberry in 2012. Across more than 4 decades, he built a reputation not just for talent, but for class. That kind of resume is why people listen when Fred Couples talks. He is not some random voice on the internet. He spent his whole adult life inside professional golf, and he helped build the modern PGA Tour right alongside legends like Jack Nicklaus and Tiger Woods. So when he speaks about loyalty to the tour, It carries real weight, and that brings us to the real fight behind all of this. The one that actually happened. A few years ago, a brand new golf league called LIV Golf appeared backed by enormous amounts of money from Saudi Arabia. LIV Golf offered massive guaranteed paychecks to top players, and many big names left the PGA Tour to join. For Fred Couples, who had given more than 43 years of his life to the PGA Tour, this felt personal. He did not see it that way as a simple business choice. To him, some players were not just leaving quietly. They were taking the money and then turning around to publicly trash the very tour that had made them rich and famous in the first place. It is important to notice that Couples did not blast every single player who left for LIV Golf. He actually said he had no problem at all with players who simply took the money and stayed quiet about it. If someone offered massive guaranteed money to a player past his prime, Couples openly said he would tell that player to take it and enjoy it. He showed real respect and quiet courtesy toward defectors like Charles Schwartzel, Brandon Grace, and Brooks Koepka. He also praised younger players who chose to stay, pointing out that a rising star named Will Zalatoris twice turned down LIV Golf offers, one worth $35 million and another worth a staggering $130 million. Just to remain loyal to the PGA Tour. Sharp comments were aimed only at the loud ones, the ones who left and then kept criticizing the PGA Tour in public, almost like they wanted credit for hurting the tour on the way out the door. The Couples made these comments at a PGA Tour Champions breakfast ahead of the Hogue Classic in Newport Beach, speaking candidly to reporters before his tournament began. So here's where the real countdown begins. These are the 5 names tied to Fred Couples' harshest public criticism during the LIV Golf fallout. To be clear, this was never a formal list of cheaters. It was something messier and more honest than that. A list of golfers who Couples felt had embarrassed themselves by biting the hand that once fed them. Number 5 on this list is Pat Perez. The Perez often spoke proudly about LIV Golf's format and its massive paychecks, all while taking shots at the competitive structure of the PGA Tour he had left behind. Fred Couples grouped him right alongside 2 much bigger names for doing exactly that. The internet made it sound like a battle over honesty, but to Couples, the issue was simpler. The Perez seemed happy to enjoy the new money while dismissing the very system that had given professional golf its reputation in the first place. It is a small thing on its own, but it added to a growing pile of frustration that Couples clearly could not ignore. Couples, complaining about a system while still cashing checks from the very tour you're criticizing, did not look fair. And it did not look honest either. Number 4 is Greg Norman. The Norman was not just another player who left, he became the face of the entire LIV Golf project, serving as its leader and biggest promoter. Fred Couples did not hold back when talking about him, bluntly saying that no one had really liked Greg Norman for 25 years. That line landed hard because Norman had tried to sell LIV Golf as something exciting and new, calling it golf but louder. To Couples, Norman was not just divisive inside the sport. He represented the whole disruption that was tearing at the tour Couples had spent his life building. The Norman had spent years trying to convince fans that louder music and shorter formats made golf better, and Couples simply was not buying it. Number 3 is Cameron Smith. Smith's reason for joining LIV Golf became a target almost immediately. He had said that the busy PGA Tour schedule made him miss important moments like birthdays and weddings. Fred Couples pushed back hard on that excuse, pointing out that Jack Nicklaus managed to raise 5 kids and 40 grandkids without using missed family milestones as a reason to walk away from competition. Couples, dressing up a massive money decision as some kind of personal sacrifice did not sit right at all. It made the whole explanation sound less noble and a lot more convenient. Couples, real sacrifice, and a giant paycheck rarely belong in the same sentence. Number 2 is Sergio Garcia. Fred Couples bluntly called Garcia a clown, and that label stuck fast in headlines everywhere. The issue was not simply that Garcia left the PGA Tour. It was how he left. The Garcia had a public outburst against a rules official shortly before making his exit, and afterward he kept criticizing the tour publicly on his way out the door. Couples, that kind of public complaining looked childish, almost cheesy, especially coming from someone who had built an entire career inside that very same tour. The Garcia had been part of golf for decades, and watching him trash the system that gave him his platform struck Couples as ungrateful. And finally, number 1, the name tied to the harshest insult of them all, Phil Mickelson. Fred Couples called him a nutbag, a word that instantly spread across golf media everywhere. The criticism here went beyond simple disagreement. The Couples openly mocked the contrast between a reported payout of $200 million at age 52 and Mickelson's actual results on the course, including rounds where he shot scores of 74 and 75. Couples' Phil was not just leaving the PGA Tour behind. He was seen as actively attacking the very organization that had helped build killed his entire legacy, and that public betrayal is exactly why Couples' reaction became so sharp and so personal. The Mickelson had spent decades as one of the most beloved names in the sport, which is exactly why watching him turn against the tour stung so much harder than any of the others on this list. Now, here's where things get a little messier and a little more important to get right. Patrick Reed's name often pops up anywhere golf and the word cheater are mentioned together. The Reed has faced real, well-documented rules controversies over the years, including questions about improving his lie and waste bunkers and incidents involving incorrectly marking his ball on the green. Those moments earned him a reputation around the sport for playing loose and fast with the rules. But here's the part that really matters. Fred Couples has never publicly called Patrick Reed a cheater. Even though both men have shared the same tournament fields for years, that specific label has never come from Couples directly. And it is important not to put words in his mouth that he never actually said. There are a few other real rule stories floating around out there that search engines sometimes connect to this same topic. It is also worth remembering that Couples never tried to paint every LIV player as a villain. Ahead of the 2023 Masters Champions dinner, he made a point of saying he still respected the competitive skill of the players who had left, even while urging them to stop trashing the tour that raised them. Back in 1985, a young golfer named Vijay Singh was suspended from the Asian Tour following allegations that he had altered his scorecard to lower his score and make the cut. The Singh went on to build a Hall of Fame career anyway, but that early controversy still gets mentioned in old rules violation discussions. The more recently, in 2023, a golfer named Gabby Lemieux accused a playing partner during LPGA qualifying school of incorrectly replacing a ball marker. In an ironic twist, Lemieux focused so hard on reporting that infraction that she ended up signing her own incorrect scorecard, which led to her own disqualification. The golf forums like Golf WRX have also hosted long-running debates about other players, including older arguments involving Mark McCumber and Billy Mayfair. None of these stories actually involve Fred Couples making any accusation. They simply show why search engines, hunting for any connection between golf and the word cheater, end up pulling his name into conversations that were never really about him. Now for the strangest piece of this entire puzzle, the part that almost sounds made up, but is completely real. Remember that old video game from 1994 called Golf Magazine Presents 36 Great Holes starring Fred Couples? It was made for the Sega 32X console, and gaming websites have kept detailed cheat code pages for it ever since, even decades later. These gaming guides are literally titled Fred Couples Cheats. Search engines crawling the internet kept pairing his name with the word cheater again and again, completely separate from anything happening on a real golf course. In a strange way, part of this entire viral golf scandal was quietly built from old video game instructions that had nothing to do with professional sports at all. There's even one more layer, a more playful one. Among recreational golfers, there is an inside joke calling Fred Couples a notorious cheater because of his equipment setup as a senior player. The Couples famously plays without using any iron higher than a 7-iron, choosing more forgiving fairway woods and hybrid clubs instead. Casual players sometimes joke that this kind of setup is basically cheating because it makes the game easier. It is obviously not a real accusation, just locker room humor, but it adds one more harmless thread to the tangled web search engines eventually wove together. So when you pull every single thread apart, here's what the truth actually looks like. The viral title claiming Fred Couples named 5 golfers as cheaters is not literally true. He never held a press conference. He never released an official statement. He never sat down and built a formal list naming 5 people as rule-breaking cheaters. But there's an emotional truth hiding underneath that fake headline, and it might be even more interesting than the original claim. Fred Couples really did judge certain golfers harshly, just not for cheating on a scorecard. He judged players who took enormous LIV golf money and then turned around to publicly trash the PGA Tour that had built their entire careers. He judged loud public complaining. He judged weak excuses dressed up as noble sacrifice. In his eyes, these players had hurt the very game that had made them wealthy and famous, and that, to him, was the real betrayal worth speaking up about. In the end, Fred Couples' legacy stays exactly as strong as it always was, maybe even stronger, now that the full story is out in the open. He spent over 4 decades defending what he believes professional golf should stand for: respect for the people who built the game, loyalty to the organizations that gave players a chance to shine, the real competition earned through hard work, not bought through outside money, and honesty about why you make the choices you make, instead of hiding behind excuses that do not quite hold up under pressure. The internet went looking for a clean, simple cheater list. Something with 5 neat little names attached to scandal. What it actually found was something far more human and far more interesting: a genuine loyalty war between old golf and new money fought with sharp words instead of rulebooks, and led by a Hall of Famer who still believes that some things in golf, like respect and loyalty, are worth more than any paycheck could ever buy, and that, in the end, might be the most honest cheater story golf has ever produced, even if it never needed the word cheater at all.